When I was 13, my parents crashed their car and died. This caused me to go up for adoption, and after a year in the care home, I was adopted. The man who adopted me was a kind man, but something had always felt a bit off. His smile looked so forced, his eyes wandering around the room. After I was there for a few months, he told me to help him sort out the basement, as he wanted to renovate it into a sort of man cave. This sounded fun, so I agreed. The basement entrance was via a hatchway in the garden. When I entered the basement for the first time, I instantly began exploring every nook and cranny until I came across a hatch in the wall. Now, for some context, this was the first time I really had a basement, so I had no idea what this was. When I asked my dad, he told me it was a crawl space, which I never had in my old home. Once he told me, I ran back over, opened it up, and crawled inside. The area was empty, with a mud floor. Wires and pipes could be seen. While I was exploring, I heard a creak behind me, and then a hand grabbed my shoulder, and I instantly jumped from fear. "Don't go back inside there again." It was my dad, with an angry and weird look in his eyes. His sudden switch in personality creeped me out, so I obliged. Before long, the basement was cleared out, but why he didn't let me into the crawl space intrigued me. After 6 months went by and my curiosity got the best of me. One day, I snuck down there and found the crawl space again. I entered and began crawling around, looking at the wires and pipes, until I came across a hatch in the floor. I opened it, revealing a hole and a ladder going down it. What the hell was down there? Did my dad know about it? I was so scared not knowing what was down there, but also I was curious. While I was starting to climb the ladder down, a hand grabbed me and pulled me back up violently. My arm hurt so much and I cried, and to my surprise, it was my dad who pulled me back from the hole. He had again the same expression in his face of terror and madness. He told me that he was very angry, and I could have killed myself with the voltage of the wires down there. But when I told him about the hatch, he became intrigued. He didn't know about it, so I took him down to the crawl space and showed it to him. He took a flashlight and climbed down and landed on the floor. I was watching from the top of the hole, him climbing down into the crawl space. At the base of the ladder was a hallway leading into a room. The room contained a mattress, food, and a sink. Someone was living down there. Suddenly he screamed, "Run! Call the police!" I had no idea why he was screaming like this, so I decided to run and call the police as fast as I could. But before I leave, I turned around to see my dad climbing up from the hole. I will never forget the terrifying look in his eyes. It was something that froze me to the spot. Just as he grabbed the last rung, footsteps were heard from behind him. He stopped and looked down as a thing grabbed his leg and pulled him violently from the ladder. My dad was trying to get away, was trying to grab from everything he could. So I ran to him and gave him my hand, but before he could grab it, he screamed. And that made me look behind him, down to the hole. I could not believe in my eyes. It was a thing that looked like a man, but wasn't. It was bald. He didn't have a single hair in his entire body. The hole was so dark that the only thing I could see was that thing biting my dad's leg and pulling him down. I froze, before half crawling, half running out of the crawl space, and then fully running for the telephone. I called the police, while screaming at the top of my lungs for them to help my father. The police came about 10 minutes later and caught the thing eating my dad. It turned out that that was a madman who was an escapee from an asylum. He had apparently been living in that hole for years, only living for food. He was sentenced to death. After that, I went back into care, but haven't been readopted. It's been a few years, so maybe I can talk about it. I highly doubt anyone will believe me anyways. 2 years ago, I lost my friends, Jessica, Michael, and Nick, to a pointless game. Our friendship was a typical stereotype, honestly. I had met all of them in school, when my family had first moved to this backwash town in Kentucky. Our group was definitely a strange one. Jessica and Michael were from 2 very different families. Honestly, their parents hated each other. What drew us together was our wide range of home troubles, from abuse to neglect to poverty. We found in each other a makeshift family, becoming brothers and sisters. After school, we stayed together. Nick and Jessica started to date. Michael and I got a flat together. We even all worked together for a while. Sadly, things started to fall apart for our group after Nick and Jessica broke up. I think we simply were finding out that we were no longer teens. After that, we stopped hanging out through the week. Then we stopped seeing each other on the weekends. Then we were lucky to see each other in a month and on holidays. 3 years after we had went our separate ways, Michael showed back at my house. So after getting him moved back into my couch, we decided to place a few calls to Nick and Jessica. We finally had a night planned. The 4 of us would celebrate my birthday together. After a few drinks and catching up, we decided the best course of action would be a movie before we left each other. Michael absolutely hated movies, but since it was October, he agreed to watch any horror film we could agree on. Jessica had always hated gore, but eventually, Nick got her to agree to Psycho. A great choice of film, since I love Hitchcock's films. Shortly after the intro, I decided to excuse myself for a smoke before I missed anything good. The cool October night air felt amazing, especially since I was slightly tipsy. About halfway through, I noticed the lights in the stairwell that lead to my apartment were off. Maintenance in the shithole was a major joke, but it still surprised me. Usually, the landlord wanted the outside appearances kept up to lure in potential customers. I decided it wasn't really worth my time and flicked my butt into the empty lot below, coming back in time to see Bates talking to Crane in his taxidermy room. Soon Nick and Jessica were wrapped up on my sofa. Michael was asleep on my recliner, and I was polishing on the last lights. The shower scene started, and the lights cut out, causing Jessica to jump a good foot, hitting Nick, who muttered obscenities under her shrieks. Michael woke up from her screams and told her to shut up. After stumbling around in the dark for a few seconds, he found a flashlight. I kept around for this sort of thing. He mumbled under his breath and shambled into the still darkened hallway to flip the breaker in the basement. A few minutes passed and we still didn't have any power, so I decided to go and see if I could help. After finding my spare flashlight and some batteries, I stepped into a now flickering hallway. Shaking my head at the sudden seizure-inducing light, I carefully made my way down one flight of stairs. Then rounded the corner to see a man in a wheelchair. Hearing my footfalls, he slowly turned his face to face me, and I felt my blood run cold. The man must have been a burn victim, because his face and arms were bandaged, hiding them completely from my view. His lower legs clearly missing below the knees. His grisly visage was not what scared me though. It was a clinging knife he held in his right hand, drenched in a deep crimson. He started breathing, a wheezing hawk, still audible. Then the squeaking started, the rusted wheels moving, crying out for oil with every rotation. And he was fast. In a few seconds, he had already crossed half the hallway before I could think. Then adrenaline kicked in, and I bolted for the corner, and my saving grace, stairs. I felt a gust of wind behind me and a sharp pain to my back. I turned to see the knife had glanced by me, the wheelchair sliding on one wheel, and a gliding red eye through bandages that held only malicious in them. I bounded up the stairs faster than I thought possible and froze one last time to see the figure at the bottom rage in his stoned body. I made it to my door and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt and falling against it. Jessica and Nick ran to me as I attempted in vain to breathe and explain through panicked gasps. Nick, always bigger than me and not exhausted, set me to the side. He was about to open the door when we heard a noise. A thump, followed by another and another with no gap in between. A few seconds of silence passed, and then a hammering shook the door. Then a crescendo assaulted in. We moved from the heavy metal barrier just in time for the shattered door jamb to collapse and the door fly open. A wheelchair skittering to a halt on the carpet floor. Then we saw a figure in the doorway. It was the burned man from before. He was standing on his hands, stabs casually flung over his back, as if there were jackets on a chair. Then his head craned up, bending in an impossible contortion, the bandages falling away to reveal empty pits where eyes had been and a wide sharp grin. Then he spoke in a deep reverb. Nick pushed us behind him, yelling us to run to the back room. He charged at the thing and threw a punch that was scarcely blocked by a leg stump. The creature's grin widened past the boundaries of his face, and then with the same ease he had used to defend himself, he had used to lash out at Nick's torso, throwing him violently down. With Nick on his stomach, the creature leaped on him, biting at his trapezius muscle, sprouts of blood soaking his demonic face as Nick struggled. He looked at me and mouthed something to me. I grabbed Jessica's hand and took off to the back room. Jessica screamed at me, but the pounding in my ears stopped me from hearing her. After we made it, I slammed the door shut and threw a spare desk in front of it. After a few seconds, the apartment fell silent as Nick's screaming stopped and Jessica began to silently sob. The thumping started again, growing in volume as it vastly grew closer. I held my breath, trying to not give away our location, to no avail. A scratching noise descended on the room, and again quiet. The door started to give us the first blow hit in. The second blow bowed it slightly before the third blow shattered it. The creature swinging in, gripping the transom in blackened claws. As soon as he saw us, his grin returned, a dark light coming over his face. I hurried over to Jessica, grabbing her and racing for the window. While she clawed at the lock on it, I flipped an old couch in between us and the monster, attempting to slow it down if I couldn't stop it. I turned to see Jessica had opened the window. Being on the second floor, the jump would not hurt, taken properly, so I told her to jump. She looked worried, but looked back at the demon they had just somersaulted into the room, standing once again on hands, contorting its neck to look directly at us. She turned to the window and prepared to jump, when suddenly the beast bounded after her. He moved so fast, sprinting on hands, moving with more speed than anyone could on legs, and grabbed her with both of his legs before she was thrust through the grass. After it watched her fall, the thing turned to me, grin still on his face, as he rotated without moving his head to hang by his hands from my windowsill. I prepared to run back, but my previous attempts to stop the thing would slow me down, long enough for him to rush me at least. The creature leaned in closer to me and whispered in my ears, the words not making it through my panicked mind. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move from the splintered door. Michael staggered to my side, blood pouring from a wound in his back. I saw the look he gave the thing, and in its eyes I saw something I didn't expect I could know. Fear. Before either of us could react, Michael had crossed the room and had grabbed the demon, taking him to the ground with him. I rushed to my window to see police lights flashing in the lot below, the bodies of Jessica and Michael on the lawn, blood pouring from both of them. I sank to my knees, not knowing what to do, until the police came to get me. Everyone who dealt with me told me I should consider myself very lucky that the police didn't arrest me from the murder of my friends. However, I am not lucky. My friends were slaughtered, and that thing is still out there. As I look through my window in this asylum, I know he is, because he visits me, hanging by his arms in the great pine outside my window. He pulls himself up to whisper me every night, the same thing he whispered to me that night when he hung from my window then.
I found the smoke.
As a child, I always found comfort with people. It gave me this sort of feel in which I found comfort in. Any scares I would have would go away with people, whether it be in fear of monsters or vengeful spirits. The joyful sound of the garage door to my house always made me happy. Being an only child myself, I was always scared because I did not have what I always wanted besides me. My room is where I spent my days. I had a daily pattern: go home, do homework, walk up the stairs, go down the hallway to my room and wait. I would find comfort in playing games online, in which players may speak to other players. Voice communication was the best I found for me. While playing those games, I would wait for that great sound of my garage door opening. My dog would bark, my mother would greet my dog, and I would then greet my mother when I walked downstairs and welcomed her. These days was not the same as it usually was. While playing my favorite class as Spy, the same player would always find me and kill me. Even if I was invisible, I would be slain by this person. Strange, I thought, until I heard the voice. I'm always watching. It was very creepy. It had a deep pitch to it, and it almost sounded like it was all the people I could hear. People saying, "What the hell?" filled the side chat. I got freaked out, then closed the tab and went to YouTube and started to watch funny videos. I was thinking this guy was just kidding the whole time, to try to explain that to myself. Around 30 minutes later, after watching the videos, I heard the glorious sound of my garage door opening. I can tell you I was relieved to hear the blissful sound of it. I then heard the door open and my dog barking, as usual. But then I heard a sound A faint cracking sound and the dog stopped barking. Weird. There wasn't any sound of my mom saying hello to my dog. Silence. What the hell is going on here? I thought as I began to set up from the desk, but at the very moment my router went out. Now I was getting scared. I ran down the stairs. All that I saw were muddy footprints, no sign of my mother or my dog. Except these footprints, they were red, dark red. They seemed to drag off into the router room. Around this moment, I was freaking out. I started to yell, "Mom?" as I walked over to investigate where the footprints led. The footprints led through each other. One pattern seemed to lead towards the garage door, so I walked towards it. I found that the door was open, and so was the garage. I freaked out and ran. I ran straight towards the router room so I could call the police. Dead. The phone was dead. I started looking around, and then I saw something that shocked me. My dog's corpse, its neck flung to the side. I started to cry and went upstairs to call the police from my cell phone. I dialed 911 and I explained them what had happened. They told me to lock the door of my room and wait for them. They sent a police squad right over. They investigated and I called my mother, and she immediately left work to come see what happened. She came back and we hugged and cried together. The investigators started to look around, and as they went into the basement, we heard yelling and a gunshot, and they scurried back. They called back to the station to ask for assistance to dispose of a dead body. They then told us what they saw. They found a hole, a large hole in which a human could fit through behind a rolled wardrobe. A 50-some-year-old man lived in our basement, and judging by the amount of feces and urine in the corner of his hole, he has lived there for a while. He would steal a small amount of items we would not notice: cans of food, small water bottles, toilet paper, minimal things in need for survival. He also had a computer in which he probably played with me on. But the scariest thing was, they found my personal items: used shirts, food wrappers, strands of hair from one of my brushes, toothbrushes, fingernail clippings, photos, and even flash drivers of videos of me and my friends. He was obsessed with me. When they investigated more, they found out that he would use my computer. He knew my Steam name. He would look through my history and went through my files while I was at school. They found out his name, Joseph Meyer, a son of a German immigrant who went missing around the age of 14. While looking through DNA files, they found out many cases of murders linked to him, all around my age. They had been murdered around 1.5 years ago, with him living in their house, all of them killed. He was apparently plotting to attract me by opening my garage door, then he would murder me. Fortunately, he must have thought I had a friend over and ran back to the hall. My mom got a job in which she would stay at home to help comfort me. To this day, I always check my house everywhere in case another man may be living in my house. Since I was 17, I was barely able to sleep to this day. He started to wake up. He could feel the pain all over his body. He could also feel something else, something metallic, keeping his arms and legs still. He slowly opened his eyes, and all he could see was a very bright light hitting his eyes like needles. He then noticed the handcuffs on his arms and legs. He slowly sat up a little and saw what was going on. He was in a surgical room on a table. He was feeling a sharp pain on his ribs when he was breathing, and then he saw a deep cut on his right side. What have they done to him? Where was he? Who was keeping him there? He started to panic and made sudden movements, trying to release himself from the handcuffs to no avail. It was impossible, and when he realized it, he stopped. Out of nowhere, he heard running footsteps coming from what seemed to be a hallway. He could hear them louder now, coming closer and closer towards the door. The door opened, and before he could say anything, a woman in her mid-50s walked in fast, almost running, and grabbed a small key from her bag that she was holding. "Quickly, they will hear us," she said. She removed the handcuffs from his arms and legs, and she helped him to get up. Then she gave him a t-shirt and a pair of pants that she kept inside her bag. "Wear this quick, I'm going to get you out of here." "Who are you, and what they have done to me?" he said, trying to put his pants on at the same time. "I want to help you," she said. "I'm not like them." "What have they done to me?" "They were trying to mess up with your brain, but I can see that you haven't lost it yet." "Why are you helping me?" he said. He was trying to put his t-shirt at the same time. The woman looked at him with tearful eyes. That question felt like a blade in her neck. "I'm your wife, but you can't remember me anymore, can't you?" He was looking at her shocked, not believing what she was telling him, but she seemed kind of familiar, so he just said, "I'm sorry." From a distance, a door opened and closed quickly, and they both looked surprised at the same direction. "Oh my God, they're coming! Follow me," the woman said. They both ducked under the surgical table and crawled through the other side of the room to where a different door was. The woman opened the door and led him to the stairwell. "I'm going to take you to the exit, and then you will run as fast as you can, okay?" she said, and he agreed. They both climbed down 3 sets of stairs until they found the exit. She pushed him through the door and gave him a piece of paper. When he turned around to talk to her, she was gone. He heard running footsteps from a different part of the street. "Find him and kill him," an angry man shouted. He had no time to waste. He opened the folded piece of paper with his hands shaking. It's a map that was showing him how to get out of the damn city. He had to go south, and that was what he was planning to do. The map was showing a river 300 meters from where he was standing. He started running when he heard a woman's voice behind him shouting, "There he is!" He turned to see what was going on behind him. Big mistake, because a sense of fear came over him as he froze to the spot. 20 or more people were running towards him. They were wearing ugly, hideous costumes and masks. In their hands were weapons, all kinds of weapons, knives, crowbars, axes, javelins. He knew that if he didn't start moving soon, they would capture him and tear him apart. With the little strength that was left inside of him, he ran. He turned on a different street, only to find more crazy people with flashlights on their hats, looking for him. He took another turn, and according to his map, he was very close to the river. And yes, there it was, the river. He was saved. There were 10 people waiting for him by the shore. He had to take another road. He turned back only to find more of those crazies running here and there and looking for him. He found a dumpster not too far away from the river, and with careful movements, he pushed himself in. He needed to calm down and think what he was going to do next. Outside, near the dumpster, he could hear heavy footsteps passing by. And for a second he felt safe, thinking that no one had an idea that he was hiding in there. Once he felt like it was about time to keep moving on and couldn't hear no one else close by, he carefully jumped out of his hiding spot and took a different road to the river. At last, no one was there. He made it. Now, the only thing that he had to do was to cross over to the other side and into the woods. He put one leg and then the other into the icy cold water and started walking carefully to the other side. After 5 minutes, the water was up on his chest and was struggling not to fall and carried away by the strong current. He made it into the other side. He stopped and rubbed his hands together. They were cold like ice, and the temperature was very low that night. He climbed through some rocks and moved into the deep forest. He wasn't sure what he was going to find, but anywhere was better than that crazy town. He was walking for at least an hour and could no longer walk. His arms and legs were frozen. He stopped and sat on a big rock. He couldn't see anything. It was pitch black and the moon was hiding behind some thick clouds. "I think it's going to rain," he said, and looked towards the sky. He heard shattered branches behind him and a blood-curdling scream. Something he had never heard before, and when he turned around to see what it was, he saw 2 yellowy eyes looking at him. It was a creature that looked like a dog, but deformed and with no skin. And that's when he realized that the rule that Dam City had was to protect the people who lived there and not to imprison them. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Now, to start with, I've always been a very logical person, but I have also been experiencing rather weird things all my life. The story I want to tell now is quite bizarre, and it has kept me thinking for hours, trying to come up with a logical explanation for it. It annoys me so much that nothing seems to add up. I was about 14 at the time, and I lived with my parents in a rather big house in a neighborhood surrounded by a forest. My house was a bit creepy to stay at night, but I was a rather brave kid, so I did not mind my parents going to a party and leaving me alone until like 4 a.m. In fact, I was quite happy about it, as I could invite my friend over to watch movies and have a good time. This friend of mine lived across the forest, which took about 7 minutes to cross, so I took my dog and went to meet her. We walked together to my house and stayed there for quite a few hours, not even noticing how it slowly got pretty dark outside. Of course, that meant that she had to go home. To be honest, the dark was more exciting rather than scary. We took my dog and went to the forest. As we were about midway, we heard music quietly playing not far from us. Now, I know how fake this seems, but it sounded like a melody you could hear from a creepy old music box. Something straight out of a horror movie. Now, of course, we found that incredibly cool, laughing about it, trying to scare each other. It was all fun and games, till I realized that I will have to walk back home alone. It made me quite uneasy, but I managed to hold myself together as I said goodbyes to my friend and joked a bit about it, walking back with the scary music playing. But guess what? It had stopped. I was still walking pretty fast, as I wasn't comfortable with walking around in the forest in the dark, but not hearing that creepy music box was really comforting. As I got home, I turned on the TV and watched Cartoon Network for a few hours. I kid you not, Courage, the scaredy dog, was on when I heard my own dog barking outside. Now, I have to mention that at that time we always used to lock her up for the night, as she is quite an adventurous dog who loves causing mischief and running away and stuff. So her bark reminded me that I completely forgot to lock her up, and it was way past her sleep time. My father told me to bring the dog inside. Feeling a bit uneasy, I dressed up and walked outside to get my dog. The wind was blowing like crazy. It was jet black outside, but the craziest thing was a quiet but still pretty distinctive sound. It was the music I heard in the forest, right there next to my house. What the hell is that? Then I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from behind my house. I ran as fast as I could inside and went to my parents' room, who were already alerted and afraid that I was hurt, since they heard the scream too. The power went off, and the only thing we could hear was our heavy breathing and the creepy music box music. "Nobody moves," my father said. Then he grabbed a flashlight that he always had next to his bedside table. He flashed around the room, trying to see what was going on. I was standing next to the door and my mother next to the bed. He flashed the flashlight to my face and asked me if I was okay, and I said yes. Then he flashed it on my mother's face, and we both screamed in terror. A black arm was around my mother's neck, suffocating her. My father ran to her, throwing the flashlight down, and I couldn't see anything, but I could only hear the suffocating screams of my mother and my father trying to release her from that thing. I could no longer stand the situation, and I screamed. Suddenly, the power came back, the music stopped, and my mother was laying on the floor on my father's lap. She was trying to breathe, but she was okay. My father told me to be brave and go downstairs to call the police. I didn't want to go, but I had to. I had to call for help. I went downstairs and I dialed 911, but the phone was dead. "The phone is dead, Dad!" I yelled to my father while crying. He came downstairs, grabbed me by my shoulders, and told me that I had to go to the neighbor's house through the forest to ask for help. My mother needed to go to the hospital immediately. "Oh my God, I can't do that," I said to myself. I took my dog and ran as fast as I could with a flashlight in my hand through the pitch black forest. My dog by my side, we were both running, and suddenly my dog stopped and started growling. I could hear the faint sound of that creepy music coming from behind me. My dog was looking at the same direction to where the music was coming from, and suddenly I heard a creak. A branch broke behind me, and I decided not to look back but to run. I could see the lights from the upstairs window of our neighbor's house. When I got there, I was pounding on their door like a maniac, screaming, "Help me! I need help!" They opened the door and let me in. We called the police, and when they finally arrived, they found both of my parents dead. Someone had strangled them, but they were not the only corpses they found. They also found the corpse of my friend, who apparently heard the music and came to my house to warn me. But it was too late for her and my parents. The police were searching for years for the murderer, but never found him. I knew it wasn't a man. It was a thing that came through a creepy music box. I still remember the black arm around my mother's neck, and I could still hear that creepy music echoing through the wall of my bedroom every time I go to sleep. So if you hear a creepy music coming from the forest at night, run as fast as you can, 'cause you will be next.